Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on shared society in Israel. My name is Tracy Spiegelman from the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, and I am proud to serve on the Israel and Overseas Committee of the Jewish Federations of North America. As you are aware, Israel is home to a complex and diverse society. Jewish federations are committed to bringing you updated, relevant, and timely information to help you understand the complicated and evolving issues that develop out of that diversity. Today's call is part of that focus. Supporting shared society between Jews and Arabs in Israel is a critical component of Federation's mission to build flourishing Jewish communities worldwide. In May of 2021, violence erupted in mixed Arab and Jewish cities. Afterwards, Jewish Federations commissioned NAS Research and Consulting to map the field of shared society between Jews and Arabs in Israel. This research is intended to help guide our future decisions on investment in this field. The purpose of today's call is twofold: to share key findings from the new commissioned report and to provide important context and background on the field of organizations and activists building shared society for Jews and Arabs in Israel. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers: Liron Shaham, Executive Director of the Interagency Task Force on Israeli-Arab Issues; Avivit Chai, co-founder of NAS Research and Consulting, an expert on Arab society and Jewish-Arab relations in Israel; and Dr. Nazreen Haddad Hajika, co-founder of NAS Research and Consulting, former director of the Arab-Jewish Relations Program at the Israel Democracy Institute. Liron, we're going to begin with you, please.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you to JFNA, and it's good to see so many people on this call. There's so much to go over in the report. It's really the findings that are going to be the most helpful for everyone. But given the amount of turbulence right now in Israel and everyone's interest in the flux we see on the field, I'm really happy to have been invited to kind of put what is shared society, significance of shared society from American Jewish perspectives. How do we look at it? What is the significance, especially now? So I'm going to take 5-6 minutes to put it in a little bit of context. So Interagency Task Force on Israeli-Arab Issues, IATF, we've been educating about Arab society in American Jewish context for 16 years. And what we're seeing right now from the Israel side is really a shift of messaging about Jewish-Arab relations, even though in reality, nothing has changed about the fact that Jews and Arabs wake up in Israel every single day to go to school, to go to work, and to see a more prosperous future for their children. Over the last 20 years, creating more of these opportunities for this kind of future for both Jews and Arabs in Israel has been the driving focus of much of the field. That is, removing barriers to social and economic participation and to narrowing gaps so that Arab citizens can participate in Israel's main economics and social engines. In large part, this was driven because inequalities and under-participation of Arab citizens hurts Israel's economy as a whole and still are a deep source of frustration for Arab citizens. Through government budgets, you may have heard of 922 and 550 and the budgets for the Bedouin Society and now mixed cities. Through government budgets and really the programs developed in the civil sector, we have seen over the last 20 years amazing results in the increases in the number of Arab students in higher education, in Arab employment rates going up, in growth of the Arab middle class, and as a result, greater overall aspirations in Arab society for influence and participation in the Israeli public. Indeed, in 2022, less than a year after May 2021 events, there was an Arab party part of a governing coalition for the first time. So if we think about employment and education, these sound like economic initiatives, but successful participation of Arab citizens in Israel's main economic streams are not only a matter of scholarships and professional training. To be successful, such initiatives require cultural change, adaptations, partnerships among leaders across different sectors, and the readiness of both the public and institutions to make internal changes to make these this kind of integration work. This is where shared society work really comes into play. Relations, readiness, capacities, discourse. Over the last 20 years, the successes that we're talking about were advanced due to the overall tone set by the commitment of the government to implement budgets from the top, and the parallel development of a field of organizations that created the know-how, the concepts, and program models on the ground. While the field of shared society organizations is relatively small overall, it's been strong enough and it's developed enough strength over the years to sustain and support sustaining Israeli social resilience following escalations in Israel and wider conflict, and notably after the events of May 2021, which inspired this research. So where are we today? We are in another period of turbulence and escalations. Right now, much of the focus that a lot of what American Jews are hearing about and what is happening in the Israeli street is protests around judicial reforms and the potential impact on Israeli democracy. This is very important and does have implications for Arab society, but in parallel, there's other legislations, other proposals happening that you may or may not be hearing about. There are waves of legislative proposals related to Arab society that deal primarily with Arab citizens in the context of terrorism. Proposals to no longer accept academic degrees from universities in the West Bank, where thousands and thousands of Arab citizens go because there are still barriers to studying in Israel. Making it easier to ban Arabs from serving as ministers of Knesset, talk of revoking citizenship of anyone committed terror and their families. There's absolutely no, terrorism is a red line and no one can argue with a need to block terrorism, but the overall messaging that is happening in Israel about Arab society is one that goes back and reverts to ideas of mistrust and fear and danger. And this risks deteriorating the social and economic foundations for shared society, for social resilience, and for economic integration that have been so carefully developed over the last 20 years. For American Jews concerned about Israel's day-to-day realities, where Jews and Arabs wake up to go to work, to school, to stores together, the shared society field is now that much more important to sustain the resilience, the discourse, the familiarity that will last for a long time as Israel goes through fluctuations in its political discourse. I know this was a lot to say in a few minutes and really, really high level. I hope it is helpful. And I'll just take 10 more seconds to plug that IATF is here to, if you want to do missions, education, dedicated education on this, please reach out to us through JFNA. Thank you so much, and over to the research findings. You're muted, Tracy.
Thank you, Liron. You were so helpful and your passion is contagious. And I know how excited everyone is to hear about the research. So now we are going to hear from Avivit and Nazreen about this incredible research and findings.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much to JFNA for inviting us to speak today. We are very, very happy to present this research to you. It was a fascinating piece of work to do at NAS, and we think, like Liron is saying, that it's very, very important overall, but definitely in this point in time when Jewish-Arab relations are being tested once more. This is a very detailed presentation, and it's accompanied by an even more detailed written report, which you're going to receive following this call. We're not going to go through the whole thing because we just don't have time, but we're going to go through the major highlights, and then you're going to receive this presentation. And what we've also done is we've added footnotes to this presentation so that you can use it within your federations and your communities, and it will be an independent resource for you vis-a-vis your community or whichever other bodies you want to show this to. I'm hoping this works. Just 1 second, I'll be able to move the presentation along. Okay. So this is the outline of the presentation. We're going to talk about the general goals of the research. We're going to talk about the definition of what shared society is. Then we're going to go into the in-depth mapping that we did of the field, of the civil society organizations doing shared society work, and of the funders and federations that support them. We're going to give a special focus to the May 21 events, because it was, in fact, the impetus for this research to begin with, and we're going to end with some of the insights and recommendations. This is not moving. Okay, so I'm going to pass the presentation to my partner and co-founder Nasrin, and just unmute yourself, please, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Abivit. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm very glad to be here with you this evening. So, the following chapter describes the goals of the mapping, how it was implemented, and the mapping boundaries, what was included in the mapping, and what was outside of this scope. We talk about the goals. So this research had two main goals. The first one is to create a tool for education processes within Jewish Federation and other interested bodies about Jewish-Arab shared society in Israel. And the second one is to answer a question and concerns that people in the Federation had about this issue after the event of May 21. Next one, please. Next, thank you. No. Thank you. The research team implemented a very detailed and very deep research process. The team collected and summarized papers, research, and the article published by field organization and academic institutions, as well as media report. The full list is in the full report that you will receive after this event. And we also did comprehensive selection processes and choose 32 civil society organizations involved in shared society, and 25 leaders leading Jewish American Federation and donors that support their activities for interviews. And we also collected and analyzed information from field organizations. So what is in and what is out, as Abivit will present in a minute. The heart of this research was an in-depth mapping of civil society organization and funders involved in shared society building in Israel. The field research focused on work on Jewish-Arab partnership and work to promote equality, awareness, integration and inclusion, solidarity, partnership and tolerance. Second, Jewish Federation and major philanthropies that support the field work. Research, unfortunately, does not include work in Arab civil society, services, provision organization, and institutional player as for example, community centers, the youth movement, and academic institutions. And it does not also include government, that does not cover governmental work as ministries, the president's office, or local authorities. And it does not include and cover non-American and non-Jewish philanthropy and investment by international government actors. So what is shared society? And so let's start with talk a little bit about demography. So you can see here a lot of some figures and data regarding Arab society in Israel. So there is a lot of data, so you can look at it later when you receive the presentation. But for now, I just want you to look at the pie in the bottom left hand, where you can clearly see that the Arab society lives mostly in Arab towns, in Arab localities, and only around 10% of the Arab minority in Israel live in mixed cities or Jewish cities. So even there, we usually Arab and Jewish residents live in separate neighborhoods. So shared society is not, unfortunately, the everyday norm. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what is shared society? It was very important for us to make sure that when we speak, a common language, and we mean the same thing when we say shared society. So how do we define work that promotes shared society? Shared society leans on two important pillars: partnership and joint work on one side, and narrowing gap and promoting equality of opportunities on the other. And our research is in the field shows that this is a common and acceptable understanding today among the most of organizations promoting this work. So there are different prisms through which people in the field look at shared society work. The first one is material or economic equality versus collective equality. This is the tension between equality, sharing physical spaces and resources on the one hand, and sharing public spaces and symbolic resources on the other hand. Second one, long-term change efforts such as education and economic development, quality and integration versus responses to crisis and urgent needs such as activating networks and promoting emergency campaigns. And the third one is moving from an increasingly mixed society, integration of Arab citizens into campuses, in the labor market, mixed cities and public spaces, to a shared society moving to full inclusivity and representation. Next slide, please. And additional tension exists between building shared society through joint efforts of Jewish Arab organization on one hand, and building shared society by strengthening Arab society and Arab-led civil society on the other hand. The last prism looking at shared society through the Jewish-Arab rift versus looking at shared society through the multicultural approach. Well, this research, of course, looked through the Jewish-Arab prisms. So now we will skip a few slides because our time is very limited, and move into the mapping of the field. And I'm very happy to ask my partner Avivit to speak about that. Avivit, elayk habibti.
Shukran ktir. Thanks, Nasrin, and thank you, everyone. So we looked at the field, and as Nasrin said before, we went through a very rigorous process of deciding which organizations we're going to map, and we tried to make sure that we have a very mixed group of organizations, national organizations and local organizations, veteran organizations and new organizations. Some are jointly led Jewish-Arab, and some are Arab-led, and some are Jewish-led, and some work in mixed cities, and some focus on women, and some focus on Bedouin communities, and so forth. And so we had a very diverse group, and we looked at the organization's goals and what they perceive as their achievements. We analyzed their main challenges. We looked at their insights. We asked them about their insights on working with funders. And then we collected some quantitative data to look at the field more at large. So when we talk about the goals and achievements of the organizations, here are the major ones that were mentioned by these organizations that we mapped, also by the data that they wrote and they shared with us. So many of them try to reach the mainstream and to influence public discourse. They know that they can only touch a few people, so they often try to touch people with some level of influence, if it's working with reporters or it's working with community leaders or working with policymakers. Many of them work to increase awareness of the others' realities and narratives. As Nasreen said, shared society and living right next to each other is not the norm. So many of the organizations work via the media, or they bring the voices of one community to the other, or they encourage for Jews to learn Arabic and so forth. The third goal that organizations mentioned was to build shared social and political movements. So for example, if any of you have heard of Standing Together and other movements that work together to put Jews and Arabs together in as partners in social change processes. The fourth goal that organizations mentioned is influencing the policies and decision-makers in decision-making processes in Israel. So if any of you know organizations like Sikui or the Abraham Initiatives or others, these are organizations that work on social change through influencing policies of the government and monitoring governmental work. Many organizations work on influencing the next generation through the education system. So Merchavim, Givat Chaviva, Ajik, and other organizations, CET and other organizations that I'm sure many of you know, work in that area. And in the full report, if I can mention it again, you have many actual examples and practical examples of how organizations actually promote these goals. The sixth goal that was mentioned was to enhance workforce integration and among the employees and cultural competency among employers. So organizations like Tzofen and Kav Mashve and Co-Impact and others work to enhance that goal. The seventh goal mentioned was to transform mixed and integrated spaces into shared ones. This is a major theme in our report, and we put a lot of emphasis into that because we saw that this is a major trend in the field, realizing that areas are becoming more and more mixed as more and more Arab citizens integrate into academic campuses and mixed cities and the workforce, also in areas where they were not integrated previously. And so many of the organizations work on turning this integration into actual shared society. And lastly, many of the organizations mentioned that they feel themselves as civil society organizations in a unique position to try out new models and to try out new ideas and groundbreaking initiatives, and then to try to bring them up to scale by convincing the government to take responsibility or to fund them. So from goals and achievements, we're going to move to the main challenges the organizations mentioned. The major challenge that most of the organizations mentioned, and we've already mentioned it here, is the fact that shared society is actually the exception to the norm in Israel. Most of the Jews and Arabs in Israel live in separate communities and go to separate schools, speak different languages, have different religions and different calendars. And so this creates a very challenging reality in which to build shared society. Of course, this is why the organizations are working to build shared society, but it is a major challenge for them. The fact that this separation comes with built-in inequalities is also a major challenge, because often the kind of conditions that the Jewish side of the conversation has and the kind of opportunities that the Arab side has are very different from each other. And that's a major challenge for the organizations, trying to bring both sides together. The third challenge mentioned was the adverse effects of the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Of course, as we know, Arab citizens of Israel are also Palestinians, and they're intimately linked with the Palestinian people. And so the fact that Israel is in an ongoing conflict with the Palestinian people and with some of the countries in the Arab world, of course, negatively impacts Jewish-Arab relations inside the country. And that's something that these organizations are working to counter or to address. Many organizations mentioned the fact that they feel there is an insightful public discourse and even some kind of backlash against the successes that shared society work has achieved so far, be it on the economic level, the fact that, as Liron also mentioned in the beginning, there is a growing Arab middle class and growing influence of Arab society on the professional front, and also the fact that shared society work has actually succeeded in bringing many Jews and Arabs together, and some forces in Israeli society are working to counter that. The fifth challenge mentioned was addressing the issue of identity and collective identity, collective equality. We'll come back to that also in our recommendation. This was one of the major themes raised by the field. And organizations said, on the one hand, this is a big challenge because it's a tough issue to address. And also for many of the funders and many of the policymakers, it's easier to address economic issues than identity issues. But that nevertheless, it's a critical issue for them to address. Next challenge that organizations mentioned is the fact that Arab society and Arab Arabs are underrepresented in decision-making circles. And that is making it harder to integrate policies that are conducive to shared society because Arab voices are less heard around decision-making tables. Another challenge mentioned was, as we said before, this theme of managing mixed and integrated spaces. And of course, this is where also much of the violence of May 21 occurred. So many of the organizations after this violence realized just how critical and urgent this need is. Another challenge mentioned is actually many organizational challenges in the field, how to raise enough funds, how to ensure sustainability, how to professionalize the organizations. Many of the organizations are relatively small and they're having a very hard time creating sustainable activities. Obviously, the fact that funds are a limitation was raised by all of the organizations. And then lastly, many of the organizations said that they are debating how to approach the issue of shared society, whether it's better on the tactical level to talk about multiculturalism and part of social cohesion more generally, or is that actually counterproductive because Arab-Jewish rift is so different than any other? As you can see, we've also put some quotes for you around within the presentation, quotes that we've come across in the interviews that we did. There are many more quotes in the report. If you want to hear some of the voices in the field, we think that's very important. Philanthropy. So as you know very well, philanthropy is a very, very important player in promoting shared society because basically philanthropic funds are the major source of all the NGOs working on shared society. There is very, very little governmental money for shared society work per se. There is a lot of money for closing gaps in economic integration and so forth, but for shared society work, most of the work is by philanthropic sources. So we asked organizations on the ground about their work with philanthropy. What works, what doesn't work, what do they think about philanthropy? And Jewish American Federation specifically. Many of the organizations spoke about the processes that philanthropy has gone through in the last couple of decades, that philanthropy has become more strategic, has become more aware, has become more knowledgeable of the field and the intricacies of shared society, but also saying that philanthropy still has a lot to learn and sometimes has a hard time answering the needs on the ground or being aligned with the needs of the organizations working on the ground. Many mentioned that philanthropy finds it hard to support areas that seem political or unconventional, specifically the issue of identity, for example. Organizations mentioned that they feel that philanthropy, especially Jewish American philanthropy, but philanthropy at large, favors Jewish-led or jointly led organizations and has a harder time supporting Arab-led civil society organizations, and we'll get to that in a minute. Many of the organizations, if not all of them, said funding is insufficient and sometimes is inefficiently spent. Especially many of them said that often there is a trend among funders and something that everybody funds now, and so everybody funds it now. And that becomes a major issue. Funding in other issues are maybe left more in the shade or don't receive enough funding, and then kind of the thing to fund changes, and then everybody goes to fund that new thing. Organizations spoke a lot about the issues of encounters and dialogues. As you will see later on, this is one of the major methodologies still used in the field. And it was the single most important methodology used in the 90s. And then there was a lot of controversy and a lot of criticism about that. So organizations are saying, yes, you should continue to fund encounters and dialogue, but with a critical eye to make sure that it's work that actually has impact and is professional. We've collected quite a lot of quantitative data for you, looking at all the organizations together, kind of from a bird's eye view. I'll go through that very quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but you can find everything in the report. So we looked at what the main methodologies are. As you can see, the most common methodology is the one of dialogue and encounters, followed by community building and coalition building, and by training and capacity building. We looked at who the target audiences of all the organizations are. Of course, an organization can appear more than once here if they have more than one target audience. We looked at the geographic focus of the organizations. Are they working statewide? JNA means they're working in both Jewish and Arab communities, or just in Jewish, or just in Arab. The light bulb, what we called meta, is organizations working on research and advocacy and things that are not geographically focused. We also looked at the issue of an evaluation, and here you can see very clearly that external evaluation is extremely rare in the field, and that we think is something to look at. And we also prepared a very detailed table for you, which you don't have to memorize this very minute, but you can look at the full report, which shows you everything put together. I'm going to run through that. Then we looked at the federations and the foundations that support the work in Israel. And what's our rationale for doing that? Why are we interviewing funders? So we're interviewing funders, or we interviewed funders and federations because, as I said, they are the main source of funding for the field, but also because many of the funders have become much more than funders. They've become actual players and actual partners and actual influencers and supporters of the field in many, many ways. And we found many interesting insights in these conversations. I also encourage you, apropos that, to also talk to each other, to talk to federations and to foundations that have more experience in this field. Obviously to the task force, but also to other organizations. Many of them have a lot of knowledge to share and a great willingness to share it. We interviewed about 25 players, both federations and foundations, almost all of them Jewish funders from the US. We interviewed also a couple of British foundations. And we asked them, what did we map? We asked them about their relationships with their grantees. Why are they funding? What are they funding? And what has changed over the years. These are the major motivations that the federations said, and the foundations said the reasons why they are funding shared society. Many of them do it because of tikkun olam and social justice. Many of them do it to promote a Jewish and democratic Israel and see shared society as part of promoting that goal. Many of them mentioned working on shared society as an engagement tool, vis-a-vis their home communities, vis-a-vis their funders who are interested in that. Some mentioned that it's important for them to make sure that they are aligned with the priorities of the Israeli government. Some mentioned work on shared society because their partnership together communities are mixed, or their neighboring Arab communities. Some spoke about the urgency of funding these issues after the May 21 events. And some mentioned funding shared society to fight PDS. And here you can see some infographics about the motivations. Again, a federation or foundation can appear more than once here. And you can see that really the motivations are very diverse. We asked them how they saw that the field evolved, because many of them have been involved in the field a decade or even two or more. So they saw two major themes. One, they said the issue of supporting shared society has become much more mainstream. Many of them said, when I started, I was the only crazy one talking about this issue. And today, many of the federations and many of the funders talk about this issue and fund it. The field has become also bigger and more noticeable in Israel. Philanthropy, they said, has become more strategic and more professional. And many of them said that in this process, the one thing they have learned is to walk with caution and modesty. And they know that they don't know everything, and they know that many of them are not here to make all the tough decisions and to live through the tough realities on the ground. And that was a very interesting insight. Here again is some quantitative data about the spheres of investment. And again, you can see that the spheres are very diverse. Many work on equal opportunities and closing gaps. Many work on integrated spaces. Many work on education and so forth. So there is actually room for many different agendas. We also collected data on how long funders and federations have been involved in this issue. And you can see that that is also very diverse. I'm going to go through that. And then funders spoke of their main challenges. So they spoke about the challenge of engaging directly with Arab society. As we said before, the organizations in the field noticed that, and the funders noticed it as well, that it's either easier for them to work with Jewish-led or jointly led organizations. Some of them spoke about what they called holding the center and engaging as usual suspects, which means working in the mainstream issues, but also looking more widely at who is not involved and who else should be involved and what other issues should be covered. Many of them spoke about how they measure insights. One of the funders said, as they said, is we put here, what is the right level of frustration? We know that we need to create some kind of level of frustration, but what is the right level of frustration to say that we've had some impact on people's minds? And then some spoke about the new challenges. As we said, one example was that as Arab society is strengthened and is integrated into more areas, you need to then manage these shared spaces and areas, and that's a new challenge that rises up. About future investments, funders spoke about the need to look at challenging issues in the eye and to look at them as opportunities and not just worry about the challenge. They spoke about the need to bring more Arabs to the table, more Arab citizens, and to build the capacity of Arab civil society. Many of them spoke about the link between education for shared society and democracy. And apropos what's happening in Israel today, I think that trend is growing. How is shared society also supporting democracy? And then looking at different frameworks, and each of the funders finding the right framework through which they can actually promote shared society. I want to go very, very briefly through our chapter on May 21. We collected a lot of information for you about the events, what organizations did in the short term, what their insights are on the long term, how the funders see what happened and what their insights are. So I'm just going to go really quickly and say that it was quite impressive to see the immediate responses of the organizations. We of course saw it because we live here, so we saw it while it was happening. But even in retrospect, many organizations said we had a few days of shock and anger and panic, and then we just started to work like crazy, and we managed to do things we've never managed to do before, activate our networks and create a lot of shared society work among decision makers, among communities, among mayors and businesses and so forth, and a lot of dialogue with the donors. I see we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip through this chapter. It's very interesting, so I encourage you to read it. I'll just say that among funders, most of the funders said that immediately they put a lot of effort into doing some learning and understanding what was happening. Some funders put out targeted calls for proposals following May. Many of the funders said they are more committed than ever. But for most of the funders, May 21 did not create some significant shift or change. And actually, it seems that funding for shared society has been growing. Can you hear me? I see someone is writing that they can't hear me. I'm assuming that's a yes. Nasrin, we're going to go into the insights and recommendations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Avidit. So let's dig into the insight and recommendations. Well, the first one is to approach the field with curiosity. We encourage you to use this report as a starting point to learn more about about the complex field of shared society building. Federations that have gained experience in funding this issue can ask themselves how they can move from being funders of shared society work to become active partners to the field. The more you can learn about the field and its complexity through real experience with Arab and Jewish activists working in the field, the greater your understanding and comfort level will be.
Okay, the second recommendation is, as you heard, it comes from the field, as all our recommendations do, and basically encourages you to look at how you can include more Arab voices in learning about and developing shared society strategies. And in each one of the recommendations, we try to put some questions for you. How can you include more Arab colleagues as consultants in your developing strategies? And how can you widen the learning and dialogue beyond the colleagues you already know and beyond the people you feel comfortable with?
We also encourage you to review your shared society funding through the lens of this report's funding, and consider not only each grant of potential grantee, but also the effect and impact that your support can have on the field more broadly. For example, you can think about how your funding might strengthen your grantee and the field at large by removing funding barriers.
Our next recommendation for you is to look at the issue of mixed and integrated spaces in cities, and look at how you're addressing their needs. We have a whole conceptualization here of moving from mixing and integration to inclusion and sharing, and you can read more about that. But we heard from many of the players in the field that the fact that many more spaces are integrated has immense potential for shared society, because people see each other, they hear each other, they know each other much more than they used to. But it is also a danger, because if it is mismanaged or if it is ignored, these shared spaces can actually become a sphere of conflict. And so we encourage you to look at these questions and how you can use these lenses that we've developed for you, this conceptualization for addressing mixed cities, and especially the needs of the Arab residents of these mixed cities.
Thank you, Avivit. So let's talk about identity. And we know that the issue of identity, and when we talk about Arab Palestinian identity in Israel, is a difficult one for many Jewish federations and communities. And we also understand that each federation and each community is in a different place regarding the issue of identity. But our research shows that this issue must be addressed within shared society work. You can't ignore it. And the mapping raised a major issue. There is a growing realization in the field that developing a strong individual and group identity is very important. Precondition, yeah, thank you, Avivit, for shared society building. So we encourage you to ask how you can become more involved in this issue, and here I want to invite you to consult with Liron from the interagency task force, and you also can, of course, consult with us in NAS.
We have two more quick ones, because I'm being asked to cut it short, so you'll have time for questions. So I'm just going to mention the last two. One is to talk to unusual suspects and look at who you're not engaging so far. And the last one is to look at Arab society and Arab civil society as a place of investment. And again, lastly, we want to thank all of you and really encourage you to take this as a tool and as a beginning of a learning process and engagement process.
Thank you so much, Avivit and Nazreen. I'm sure when everyone has this physically in their hands and are able to see all of the work and really get to understand, it will become even more clear. And I know how it feels to get pushed from the chat to wrap it up. And there's so much great information. So I encourage you all to really take a great look at this report. It's really valuable information that can be used as a tool, exactly like you said. So we're going to start with a few questions from our audience. And we're going to begin with a question for Nazrit and Avivit. Eric Passman asks, how will building more shared societies address the deadly riots that took place in shared communities during the last Gaza war? I know this is really what inspired this work to begin with, and a deep dive into what was happening. So can you talk about how?
Yeah, so what we heard from the field is basically that when organizations in the field look at shared society, they look at long-term work. Shared society is about building connections. It's about narrowing gaps. It's about building capacities. It's about building partnerships. These are not things that happen overnight. They don't happen over a week or even over a year. These are long-term social change processes, and they are very, very dependent on, and they are very influenced by the major processes that are happening in the country. For now, as we said, shared society is not the norm. And in the report, we don't say shared society, we say shared society building, because it is a building process. It is not that Israel has a major reality of shared society. Now the question is, how do we maintain it? Israel, for the most part, doesn't unfortunately have very deep shared society practices. And so we're talking about building shared society. And many organizations said that when the riots broke out, they were angered and they hurt and they were scared, but they were not surprised, because many of them said, actually, this is what we've been talking about for so many years, saying that these long social change processes need to happen. And when they're not happening on the macro level, when they remain sporadic islands of success, as many of the organizations in the field call their work, the big processes, the big negative processes, like the big Israeli-Palestinian conflict or wars or security events, they impact the field much more powerfully. Having said that, we were surprised to find that about a year after May 21, which is when we finished writing the report, shared society work bounced back. Many of the organizations were working, more funding was flowing, and actually many organizations were saying that the riots scared institutional players to the effect that they made these institutional players ask for shared society work, where before they were not interested. So mayors and even government ministries were asking the organizations to provide more input than they did before, because they themselves, as big institutional players, they realized that there wasn't enough shared society work going on, and the dangers of that.
Thank you. Sarah Silver asks, what did you learn about the field's challenges in reaching Israel's Jewish majority about shared society? And I know you address challenges in the report, but can you summarize from the Jewish majority of the population how it's received? This
Yeah,
idea?
I'm going to say something, and then Asrin's going to say something, because she often finds herself talking to the Jewish majority. One of the challenges that the organizations in the field raised is that the scope of the population that they are able to reach is still relatively limited. And there are unusual suspects. There are sub-communities in Israel and subgroups that shared society doesn't reach. And many of the organizations said, we feel that these groups are being left behind. And then these groups become alienated from this work, and they become frustrated. So many of the organizations in the field are actually working on strategies to reach these alienated groups, be it by working geographical areas they didn't work before, or by developing new methodologies. One trend that we saw very clearly is the trend of Jews learning Arabic, which is something that very clearly started in the last 2 years, maybe 3, but not before that.
After the nation-state law.
After the nation-state law. And as a result of the nation-state law's demotion of Arabic from the status that it had before. So it started as maybe some kind of protest, but it definitely became a trend and it became the thing to do. And there are more and more and more bodies, including for-profit companies and NGOs, that bring really today tens and tens of thousands of Israeli Jews to learn Arabic, including discourse and dialogue with Arab citizens and visits to Arab localities. And maybe Nasreen, you can talk a little bit about your experience speaking to unusual suspects in Israeli society, like
you covered it all. So
generals and
because
police
our time is
officers.
limited, let's skip to the next question.
There's a question that just came in the chat. Yael Bireen asks what the next steps are to use this report. Can you also first talk about how some of these organizations are helping to train Arab citizens to get greater employment and to be working in the mixed communities or shared societies where everybody is really trying to elevate each other's life status? And how do these organizations in these shared societies, how does that benefit the entire society, and how will we be able to share these recommendations and this report to make these great changes and show the impact? How can we explain the story?
Wow, these are a few questions in one question. Nasreen, maybe you can talk a little bit about workforce integration, about preparing candidates and working with employers. Nadifa Shelo?
Or
Okay.
really like
So
just
I'll say 2 things. We just prepared it together, so I allow myself, we allow ourselves to speak for each other at this point in our partnership. Look, workforce integration is in some respects easier because there are very clear economic benefits to the country. And so the government has been putting, or a few governments now, 15 years now of governments have been putting a lot of
more than 50 billion shekel to integrate the Arab minority within the economy.
And it started from the Bank of Israel, basically saying Israeli economy is losing billions of shekels annually because Arab society is not integrated to the full extent of its capacity. Still, it's not easy because of language gaps and because of educational gaps and because of prejudice and because of geographic gaps. And so the organizations in the field have developed actually quite impressive methodologies to overcome these issues. They work in gap years that close the gaps between the high school and the academia, and they help academic institutions and they help the younger generation of Arab society integrate into various spheres of academia. Mm-hmm. And they work with the employers to lessen the prejudice and to prepare them to create, for example, culturally sensitive job interviews because they need to, because this is a different population, and culturally sensitive jobs or factories or where people work. The issue of the story is also something that many organizations spoke about, and they put a lot of effort into trying to create a compelling story that they can then share with the wider community. So, for example, some of the organizations work on media, and they say the fact that the Jews in Israel that read and listen and see the Jewish media, the Hebrew-speaking media, hardly ever see Arabs in the media unless there's a disaster of some sort. That obviously doesn't create shared society, and it doesn't create comfort, and it doesn't create awareness, and it doesn't create acquaintance. And so they've been working with media, not just to bring Arab experts to talk about Arab issues, but just to bring Arab experts to talk about the environment or to talk about health or to talk about high tech or whatever it is, there are Arab speakers and Arab experts on everything, as there are Jewish speakers and experts on everything. And so that's one way of telling the story without actually telling the story, by showing these are citizens like you, they are professionals like you, and they have their sphere of expertise and they're passionate about their work, or they're part of their community. So many organizations, yes, they are very, very involved with thinking about how to tell a compelling story.
But I need to say that the situation now is much better than what it was 10 years ago. For example, 10 years ago, when we have a lot of conferences, yeah, that deal with the Arab integration, for example, in the labor force or in the higher education system, but you could see only Jews talking about us. So today the situation is much better, and even in the media, when the traditional media talks about Arabs and about our problems, our internal issues, they bring more and more Arab professionals to speak about the Arab society in Israel and its issue. So there is a lot of good processes that happened during the last decade, and people are much more aware that they cannot talk about us without us.
Right. Thank you. Thank you both so much, and thank you all for your questions. I want to remind everybody you'll be receiving the entire report. I also want to thank you for joining us today. We want to thank the members of the Research Steering Committee who helped to guide NAS's work on the report. Yael Israel Cohen from UJA Federation of New York, Barak Luzon, Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco, Hila Perlman-Peniel, Combined Jewish Philanthropies of Boston, Amir Shaham from the Federation of Greater Metro West, and Lee Rohn from the Interagency Task Force. As the research makes clear, building a strong shared society among many diverse groups living in Israel is a core value for Jewish federations. There is an appetite among federation communities driven by tikkun olam and social justice for advancing the work of strengthening shared society between Jews and Arabs in Israel. This is a field where federations can make a significant positive impact for the benefit of all Israelis. We hope that federations will find this research useful in making informed decisions on how to invest in this field. As a reminder, we will be sharing a resource sheet on shared society with everyone who registered for the call today, including access to the full study and executive summary of the research presented. Many thanks to the incredible JFNA professionals for all of their hard work putting this together, and we wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you all so much.